A quiet residential street in Frederick, Colorado became the center of a nightmare no one there could have imagined. A man stepped onto his front lawn, stood before a local news crew, and spoke calmly into the camera. He said his life had been torn apart. He said his pregnant wife was missing. He said his 2 little daughters were gone too. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed, as he asked for their safe return. He looked like a desperate husband, clinging to hope. But it was all a performance. He already knew they would never come back, because he was the one who made sure of it. What unfolded inside the home on Saratoga Trail in the days leading up to that interview, and what investigators uncovered in the hours and days that followed, would become one of the most widely documented and deeply unsettling true crime cases of the modern era. Not because it remained a mystery, not because it went unsolved, but because every answer was eventually revealed and none of them made it easier to understand. From the outside, everything looked ordinary. A tidy suburban house, a couple expecting another child, 2 small girls with bright smiles and normal routines, a family that, to neighbors and friends, seemed stable and unremarkable. And then there was the husband, standing on the lawn, speaking directly into a camera, delivering a story that would quickly unravel under the weight of what really happened inside that home. This is the story of Chris Watts, and it remains one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded, not because of what was hidden but because of how much was happening in plain sight. Shanann Watts was 34 years old in the summer of 2018. She was originally from North Carolina, warm and outgoing and the kind of person who made everyone around her feel like they mattered. She had built a significant following on social media documenting her life, her family, her work as a representative for a health and wellness company called Level Thrive. Her feed was full of her daughters. Bella was 4 years old. Celeste was 3. They had their mother's warmth and their father's blue eyes, and they appeared in video after video, laughing and dancing and being exactly what 4- and 3-year-olds are supposed to be. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant when she died. She and Chris had announced the pregnancy to their families just weeks earlier. They were going to name the baby Nico if it was a boy. Chris Watts was 33 years old. He was quiet where Shanann was outgoing, reserved where she was expressive. He worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum, a job that required early morning shifts and gave him access to remote oil field locations in the Colorado countryside. By the summer of 2018, the Watts family was under significant financial pressure. They were behind on their mortgage. Credit card debt had accumulated. The life they presented on social media, the nice house, the new cars, the vacations, was being funded in ways that were not sustainable. And Chris Watts had a secret. Her name was Nicole Kessinger. She was a co-worker at Anadarko. The affair had begun in June of 2018, approximately 6 weeks before Shanann and the girls were killed. What investigators later pieced together from phone records, text messages, and Nicole Kessinger's own interviews with police painted a picture of a man who had made a decision and was moving toward it with a coldness that is difficult to comprehend. Chris and Nicole had been in constant contact throughout the weeks of the affair. Hundreds of texts, long phone calls. He had told her things about his marriage that were designed to make the relationship seem more available than it was. He had told her the marriage was effectively over, that he and Shanann were separating. What he had not told Nicole Kessinger, and what she has maintained she did not know, was what he was planning. Shanann had been away with her daughters visiting friends in Arizona for the 5 weeks prior to August 12th. She and Chris had been communicating during that time, working through what were clearly significant marital problems. Text messages recovered by investigators showed the tension between them. Shanann knew something was wrong with her husband. She did not know what. She flew home in the early hours of August 13th, arriving at the house on Saratoga Trail at approximately 1:48 the morning. She never left that house again. What happened inside the Watts home in the hours after Shanann returned from Arizona has been established through physical evidence, confession, and the kind of forensic detail that leaves very little room for ambiguity. Chris Watts strangled his wife in their bedroom while their daughters slept down the hall. Then he went to his daughters. Bella and Celeste Watts were 4 and 3 years old. They were asleep in their beds. Their father walked into their rooms. What I will tell you is that both girls were killed that night. and that what Chris Watts did with their bodies afterward is something that prosecutors described in court as an act of almost incomprehensible callousness. He loaded his family into his company truck in the early morning darkness. He drove to a remote Anadarko oilfield site called Survey 319, approximately 40 miles from the house. He knew the location. He had worked there. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave at the site. He put his daughters in oil storage tanks. Bella and Celeste Watts, 4 and 3 years old, were placed inside industrial oil storage tanks at a remote Colorado oil field by their father. And then Chris Watts drove back to Frederick, Colorado, and went about his day. Shanann's friend, Nicole Atkinson, had arranged to meet her that morning for a previously scheduled work meeting. When Shanann did not answer her door, did not respond to texts, and did not pick up her phone, Nicole became concerned. This was not like Shanann. She called Chris. Chris Watts told her that Shanann had not been home when he left for work that morning. He seemed unconcerned. Nicole called the police. Officers arrived at the house on Saratoga Trail. Chris Watts met them outside. He was cooperative. He invited them in. He answered their questions. He told them Shanann's car was still in the garage, and her purse and phone were still in the house, which was unusual, but that he assumed she had left with a friend.
What time to leave there?
No, here.
Usually between 5:30 and 6.
Alright. And was Shanann here then?
Yes. Yeah, she's still in bed.
Does she usually watch the kids, or do you have daycare watch them? Or?
She usually watches the kids if they're not at school.
Okay. You guys have any kind of issues, marital issues, or?
We're going through separation.
You are? And how's that going?
It's going
civil for the most part, or?
Additionally, we are presented with the subtle cues of Chris's forethought cover story, being that his wife simply ran off with the kids after a breakdown in the marriage.
All the girls' blankies are gone. Their blankies they sleep with, they don't leave anywhere without them.
Okay.
The officers noted that he seemed calm, measured, not the way a man acts when his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters are missing. A neighbor had a video doorbell camera. Footage from that camera showed Chris Watts loading items into his truck in the early morning darkness, before he had claimed to leave for work. The items were large. The movements were deliberate. He made multiple trips. The investigation shifted gear immediately.
Accurate manner than the police officer.
You just want to go talk to him? I'm going to get his info real quick. No.
Stuff in and out of the garage ever.
Right.
Yeah, we can pick up cars coming this way. I get anything coming this way and making this turn. So, and usually at night I pick up the cars pulling a U-turn. So, unless they pulled right here, but I would have caught her walking out.
Although not fully incriminating, as Shanann and the kids could have left.
The local news interview happened that same day, August 13th. Chris Watts stood on his front lawn and spoke to a reporter from Denver's KMGH television station. That interview has been watched millions of times. Body language experts, criminal psychologists, and ordinary viewers have analyzed it frame by frame. What most people notice immediately is what is not there. There are no tears. There is no visible distress. He speaks about his missing pregnant wife and daughters with a flatness, a smoothness, that sits wrong. When he mentions Shanann, he refers to her physical characteristics in a way that feels detached. When he talks about wanting his family back, he does not look like a man who is breaking apart. He looks like a man performing the idea of a man who is breaking apart, and not performing it particularly well.
Stations, where he came across as extremely unimpassioned and detached from the alarming nature of the situation.
Like when I got home yesterday, it was like a ghost town. Like she wasn't here. Kids weren't here. I have no idea like where they went. Right now it's you got K9 units, the sheriff's department. Everybody's like they're doing their best right now to figure out like if they can get a scent. If she wasn't here, like where did she go? Like once I got here, it was like, all right, who can I call? I called her 3 times, texted her about 3 times just to say, you know, What's going on? Like, if she's vanished, like, I want her back so bad. I want those kids back so bad. Right now, I don't even want to just, like, throw anything out there. Like, I hope that she's somewhere safe right now and with the kids. Last night, I wanted that knock on the door. I wanted to see those kids just run in, just barrel rush me and just give me a hug and knock me on the ground. That's why last night was just horrible. I couldn't do it. I'm hoping that somebody...
The FBI became involved within hours. Chris Watts was brought in for a formal interview, and what happened in that interview room is one of the most remarkable pieces of footage in modern true crime history. The FBI used a technique called the cognitive interview combined with behavioral analysis. They were calm. They were methodical. They let Chris Watts talk. And he talked. He told investigators that he had confronted Shanann that morning about the state of their marriage. He said he told her he wanted to separate. He claimed that while he was having this conversation with Shanann, he looked at a baby monitor and watched through the camera as his daughters were killed by their mother in their beds. He sat in that interview room and told federal investigators that Shanann Watts had killed Bella and Celeste. It was the kind of claim that, if true, would explain everything: a grieving husband, a disturbed wife, a tragedy rather than a murder. It was not true. The physical evidence dismantled his story completely. The forensic analysis of the girl's cause of death was inconsistent with Shanann having committed it. The timeline established by the neighbor's doorbell camera was inconsistent with his account. The items loaded into his truck before dawn were inconsistent with his account. Everything was inconsistent with his account.
Her phone's still on the couch, her purse is still there, the medicine for the kids is still there, the car seat is still there, and there's no sign of them anywhere.
Okay.
I was just hoping that, I mean, left all the lights on in the house, I was hoping that I'd get a knock on the door, but
Yeah,
nothing.
back.
Yeah, but nothing happened.
What do you think happened?
At first, I really thought maybe she was just at somebody's house, just decompressing.
What's going on, Steve?
Yeah, but after today, like with the onslaught of all the cars, I mean all the police cars, all the news, all the K-9 units, it's making me lean the other direction about someone took her.
Okay.
But it's just, if someone took her, it would have to have been someone she knew. Because there's no sign of anything like being disturbed, broken.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's the way I'm leaning now. At first I thought for real she was just decompressing somewhere. I thought she was safe, even though everything in the house was left there. On
August 15th, 2 days after Shanann was reported missing and 1 day after the FBI interview, law enforcement directed Chris Watts to the Survey 319 oilfield site. They found Shanann's body in the shallow grave. They found Bella and Celeste in the oil tanks. Chris Watts was arrested in his front yard. The case against Chris Watts was overwhelming. The physical evidence, the cell phone data, the surveillance footage, the forensic analysis, the affair, the financial pressure, the lies. There was no plausible defense. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He will die in prison. Shanann Watts was 34, a devoted mother who shared her life with warmth and openness. Her daughters, Bella Watts and Celeste Watts, were just 4 and 3. Her unborn son, Nico Watts, was already loved and named. They are buried together in North Carolina, remembered by strangers who refuse to let them be forgotten. Chris Watts is serving life in prison. The case is solved. But one question remains. Not who did it, but how someone who seemed so ordinary could do something so unthinkable.